Today I'm going to discuss the most important topic of English literature is transition age period part 2. Here we have an introduction of a transition age period. The second half of the 18th century is known as the transitional period. The period has witnesses two totally different phases of creation. The writing style of literature was changing from classical to romantic. The period was witnesses two totally different phases of creation and the writing of literature. First is the writing style of literature and was changing from classical to romantic. During in this age, writers were rebelling towards classical way of writing and were turning towards romantic literature. During this age, writers were rebelling towards classical way of writing and were turning towards romantic literature. The rise of romantic poetry has started from this period. The rise of romantic poetry has started from this period, and this rise of romantic poetry is called the romantic reaction against the classical domination. So these are the big phrases, big changes of the transition age period part 2. As I have discussed with you in my previous video, transition age period part 1. In this hmm, um, in this video, I have discussed some questions, answer of the MCQs questions, and here I am discussing what kind of a influence, what kind of a reactions, and which kind of a phrases and which kind of a um, new creations happening in the this spaces. So I hope you understand uh, whatever is I have discussed with you in the first paragraph. And the second paragraph, the age was dominated by the Dr. Samuel Johnson's, and it is also known as an age of Johnson's. It is also called the age of sensibility. The age was dominated by Dr. Samuel Johnson's, and it is also known as an age of Johnson's, and it is also called the age of sensibility. What is the meaning of the transition? It was a movement or shifting from one position to another. This can also be called someone or something moving from one place to another. Here, here in this age, literature was having a transaction from classical to romantic. So, what is the meaning of transition? It was a movement. So, or shift from one position to another position. This can also be called as someone or something moving from one place to another. Here in this age, literature was having our transactions from classical to romantic. Classical to romantic. In the second paragraph, in the literature, the transition period is between Augustan period, यानी कि classes, and romantic period. Writers have started following new ideas in the literature writing, which were totally different than classical approach of the writing. In the literature, the transition period is between the Augustan period and the romantic period. Writers have started following new ideas in the literature writing, which were totally different than the classical approach of writing. 1764, Horace Walpole wrote the first Gothic novel in English, called The Castle of Ot- mm, Otranto. Otranto, a frightening story full of supernatural events set in the medieval times. He transformed his home in the Strawberry Hills in a Gothic castle. 1764, Horace Walpole wrote the first Gothic novel in the first English, called The Castle of the Otranto, a frightening story full of supernatural events set in the medieval time. He transformed his home in Strawberry Hills in Gothic castle. In 1765, Bishop Vesey published a volume of ballads called the Reliques of Ancient English Poetry, which became very popular and made ballads truly popular. wrote by the Ocean about an unknown hero. Macpherson was so famous for his characters' oceanic poetry. James Macpherson, a Scottish poet, translated from the Gaelic in English a story wrote by the Ocean about an unknown hero. Macpherson was so famous for his characters' oceanic poetry. 1777. Thomas Chatron wrote Raleigh poems, Roy, Raleigh poems in the uh, Pseudo Middle English, and saying he had found them and that they were written by the Raleigh who did not exist. Thomas Chatterton committed suicide at the age of 70, and so he is now considered as an example of romantic poet not appreciated by the society. ठीक है? And mm, so these are the most important facts and info, most important creations by the different writers of this transition period in this time, and how each and every period, every poet have write and write a different kind of classical and romantic creations of the English literature, and how they beautifully created, and which kind of incidents and which kind of influence um, mm, um, mm, happening in this year. Um, I have discussed with you, and here we have some characteristic of the poetry. Decline of the heroic couplet and free use of the pantry chord in the work of Gray and Collins. The revival of the ballad. The description and the narrative poem begin. Example: the deserted village. The rise of the lyric. The instant simplicity of the lyric of Burn and the Plague. So these are the most characteristic of the poetries of the translation. So in this time, which kind of a creations happening? For example, classical to romantic, romantic to classic, and this kind of a features we can see, and this kind of a characteristic we can see in each and every creations of the writer. Decline of heroic couplet and free use of Pendrick oath in the work of Gray and Collins. The revival of the ballad, the descriptive and narrative poem begin. For example, the deserted village, the rise of lyric, uh, and the instant simplicity of the lyric of Bird and Blake. So here I'm going to recall all the points in order to make you understand in a deep manner. First of all, the second half of the 18th century is known as the translational period. The period has witnessed two totally different phases of creations. The writing style of the literature was changing from the classical to romantic. During this age, writers were rebelling toward classical way of writing and were turning towards romantic literature. The rise of romantic period has started from this period. This rise of romantic period poetry is also called the romantic creation against the classical domination. The age was dominated by the Dr. Samuel Johnson, and it is also known as an age of the Johnsons, and it is also called the age of the sensibility. So, what is the meaning of transition? And it was a moment of the shift from one position to another. This can also be called someone or something moving from one place to another. And here in the age, literature was having a transition from the classical to romantic. In the second paragraph, in literature, the transition period is between the Western period and Romantic period. Writers have started following new ideas in literature writing which were totally different than the classical approach of writing. 1764. Heinrich Welford wrote the first Gothic novel in the English and called The Castle of the Ortano, a frightening story full of the supernatural events set in the medieval times. He transformed his home in Strawberry Hills In a Gothic castle, 1765, Bishop Percy published a volume of ballads called the Reliques of Ancient English Poetry, which became very popular and made ballads truly popular. James McFraser, a Scottish poet, translated from the Gaelic in English, G- Gaelic in English, a story wrote by the ocean about an unknown hero. McPherson was so famous for his characteristic Gothic poetry. 1777, Thomas Chatterjee wrote the Role poem. Poems in the pseudo middle and saying he had found him and that they were written by the Role who did not exist. Thomas Chatterjee committed suicide at the age of the 70, and so he is now considered as an example of the romantic poet, not appreciated by the society. Some characters of the poetry: decline of the heroic conflict, free use of pentaric odes in the work of the Gray and Collin, the revival of the ballad, the descriptive narrative poem begin, the deserted village, the rise of lyric, the instant simplicity of the lyrics of Burn and a Break. So I hope you like this video, which is very important according to examination point of views. So uh, keep these points in your mind while you are attempting your questions paper and basically so much important MCQs questions have repeated in your exams and again. So these are the most important creations and these are the most important um, in facts about the transition age period of this time English literature. Thank you so much.